You said men and women have equal rights, but women are discriminated in various ways in which men are not. So what are some of the other ways they're discriminated against?
I would say in the forms of like unpaid labor, the way that they're discriminated against in the medical field, like women are believed on average to have higher pain tolerances. They are not taken as seriously by doctors, so a lot of medical conditions will go undiagnosed at a greater rate of women than men. And because of this, on average, women don't receive the same medical care as men. Those are just a few I can list off my head.
Don't women receive more medical care than men?
They don't. It's the quality that I'm arguing.
The quality. So
Yes.
A woman steps into a doctor's office, a man steps into the doctor's office. There will be the medical care will be worse for the woman by virtue of her being a woman.
I would argue that her concerns would not be taken as seriously as a man, and it would, on average, take her longer to receive a proper diagnosis.
I believe women go to the doctors more often than men.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe that's why?
I agree with that.
No, I think that could definitely be a point, yeah.
Most men I've
Are you
known
familiar with
definitely-
trait neuroticism?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Well, if you're not, do you think men or women tend to be more neurotic?
It's pretty equal.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty equal.
Well, I mean, psychologists have done.
Yeah, but you're asking me what I think.
They've done personality tests, they've done studies, and women rank higher in trait neuroticism.
Okay.
Again, yeah, that's all I would
Okay,
say on that.
well-
It's pretty
Do you want me
equal.
to say do you have a question?
Well, so I mean, you're saying that women are less likely to get good treatment in medical context, but women overwhelmingly receive, like, I think when it comes to what's it called, like the tax burden when it comes to medical care, women take out way more from the tax system than do men, at least from a healthcare perspective.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to, what's your argument here?
Well, you're saying that women get poorer health care, but if they get more health care than men, wouldn't that counter your argument?
Do you think quantity automatically translates
No,
to quality?
not necessarily, but I mean, men tend to take less from healthcare.
Can I provide just with one example?
Sure.
Personally, and I'll make it quick because I know it's late, everyone's tired. One of my friends recently saw the doctor probably around 10 times. Like you said, women visiting the doctor more on average. I think that's true. I don't disagree with that. She saw the doctor around 10 times. She found out that she has a condition that doesn't allow her to digest food properly. She went through so many tests, so many different scans, everything. She saw multiple different specialists. She had to do a bunch of different processes in order to get this diagnosed, a lot of different testing. In order for her to do this, though, she felt like her symptoms were being dismissed by doctors. They weren't being taken as seriously.
She felt that way. Do you have any actual evidence that they were?
Yes, I actually do. Because in one instance, and this is just one example. I'm not trying to speak on, I'm just providing one example. I don't want this to be taken as, overgeneralization. I'm just speaking from personal experience right now. Or my friends. There was one instance where a doctor sent her a copy of her x-ray, and she actually had to point out something on the x-ray that was irregular, and the doctor overlooked it. And she said, hey...
Because we're neurotic.
But because he overlooked it because she's a woman.
The doctor's a woman.
Okay, did I specify the gender of the...
You said he. Yeah, you said he as in the doctor. The doctor was a woman.
Okay. So did the female doctor overlook it because she's a woman?
I can't say for sure, but I just don't. I'm just saying, I'm not saying causation equals correlation.
I can speak on the x-ray thing.
Okay.
X-rays are notoriously difficult to read. Studies have been done. If you give the same 50 doctors the exact same x-ray, all 50 of them come out with a different diagnosis. So it's not that... I have a really difficult time believing that the medical industry is inherently biased against women. one example I could think of for why it's perceived that way is a lot of this data has to be just personal accounts, personal feeling from the patients themselves. Generally speaking, if I were to take a wild guess, I would say men probably are going to complain about their care a little less than women will.
And pursue medical attention in
Yeah,
general.
exactly. So the statistics would be skewed towards women suggesting they get less adequate care than men because men probably just won't care as much as women will. So that could easily explain why it seems like the healthcare system is more biased towards men than it is women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with parts of your argument. I do. I think that you've made a lot of valid points tonight. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I'm just still trying to hear something where women are discriminated against.
I mean, okay, what about just in the hundreds of years ago when like psychology was like first like starting, and how like easily women would get committed for things that were called hysteria.
I guess I would want to see the rates at which women were.
Well, they weren't.
committed.
They,
I mean,
they were
you could
usually
just,
treated for hysteria a
You could just
different
be
way.
sad and then get tossed in a crazy
okay.
loony
Well,
bin.
Usually,
I know-
female hysteria was treated with sedation.
Yeah, and also
So-
electroshock, things like
Not
that. Yeah, but you don't necessarily need that.
committal was due to other factors generally, not due to hysteria. So
Right.
the thing is with what you consider
That's what
hysteria,
Fox
that's a
was saying.
specific thing, right?
Yeah, I get that, but that was like my example of saying that was things like just sadness or depression that could be cured by not having be sent to a loony bin and getting more crazier.
Men were
That
also sent to loony
started
bins when
that
they were
whole
crazy.
idea of
Yeah.
what you guys were
again,
touching on earlier,
just
if
like
that's
Andrew
not
just
making
said,
sense.
it's selective. You're choosing which anecdotes to pay attention to and choosing which ones to not pay attention to. Men also suffered from being thrown in loony bins for less than ideal
did.
reasons. So it's not an
But
evidence.
not
It's not an evidence of the patriarchy oppressing women in particular. It's just saying that a long time ago, when technology wasn't as good and people weren't as knowledgeable about these things, people got shafted.
And none of those things.
And it doesn't
at
matter
all
whether
carried
it's a
on
woman or a man,
generationally.
it just happens because people weren't as smart.
Yeah, but none of those ideas at all got like passed down generationally, little bit by bit, turned into whatever
Well,
version.
none
it is
of that-
today.
none of
Like,
this is
it's not
based-
as deep as it
Yeah,
was.
none of that is
that
based on
time.
sexism, though. None of it's based on patriarchy. It's just based on we
But it
weren't
was-
medically as adept. Therefore, men and women got the raw deal.
I mean, it was mostly husbands of women like that would send them.
I would want to see
Involuntarily.
rates of
Yeah, go for
You've
this
got to
happening.
be pulling this shit out.
Yeah,
of your
there's
ass.
like no way.
I don't know.
Like, essentially,
I
it just
mean,
sounds
there
like
is some truth to the fact that there was a larger committal of women generally than men into a lot of these psychiatric hospitals. However, try to remember that psychology itself is a soft science,
Yeah,
and at
exactly.
the point in
It's
time
new.
that you're talking about, it was literally pseudoscientific. They were
Yeah.
giving people lobotomies. They were poking holes in their head. They were doing all sorts of immoral experimentation.
Yeah,
But generally, it was not husbands who were doing, kind of these overtly committals. This
Yeah,
was
parents.
women who were considered the leftovers. So these were women who
outcasted. Or,
they used no. They used to have houses for women. They were basically halfway houses for women who got pregnant out of marriage, things like this. They were kind of the dregs of society, and they would be mostly pulled from them because a lot of them actually were mentally ill. And yeah, a lot of them did get experimented on. That's true. But this is again, I'm no fan of psychology and I'm no fan of psychiatry.
Yeah.
I think that it's a pseudoscientific pursuit.
Okay, so back to you. So I still really haven't heard anything compelling when it comes to women discriminated against.
I would say that I've provided you with the examples that first come to mind for me. Those are the biggest ones in my opinion. I know that you've pulled up data that disproves that. I understand that, right?
Well, so there's the wage gap, there's the
Yeah.
healthcare thing. I mean, couldn't I just, because feminism is a game of comparison, men are privileged, women aren't. Men are oppressors, women are oppressed. Men have more rights. That is feminism. It is comparing
Not
men
core
to women.
feminism.
Hold on. So I could just return back to, I'll just engage you on the healthcare thing. Let's talk about healthcare. Upon birth, men have their genital healthcare, right?
Bye.
Secondly, if you look at who the cohort of people where experimental medications, experimental procedures are tested on, this is overwhelmingly men. And feminists will actually turn this around and say, for example, well, all these experimental procedures, they're tested on men, so men fare better. But it's not clear to me if it's some sort of male privilege or advantage for you as a man to be, a lot of these men are paid for this. Wouldn't that actually be evidence of men faring worse, that they are resorting to having experimental drugs and having experimental procedures done on them for money because they're so desperate for money, you can experiment medically on me. So given the case that, for example, just those two examples I gave you, that there's male genital mutilation on most men in this country upon birth, most boys, and that there's in terms of the
How did that happen?
in terms of the distribution, there's much more men who are experimented on medically than women. So couldn't I just turn that around on you and saying, when it comes to healthcare, that men actually have these specific negative health outcomes?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point that you raised. When we're looking at genital mutilation, that occurs within the U.S. mainly, right? It's not.
It happens in some other countries,
It does, but the majority of it is occurring in the
Yeah.
U.S. I would say that could be explained by that it's a cultural thing within the U.S. and it's a preference within the U.S. If you look at Europe, for example, they don't have genital mutilation at the same rates as the U.S.
What's the male population of the United States?
I don't know.
Over.
It's roughly 50-50. I'm not sure. I don't know the male population.
Okay, so it's over. What is it? 160 million. Okay,
Yeah, it's probably-
let's just assume that most of those men, maybe 80-90% of those men, had a circumcision. Okay, so that's a lot of men.
But that's women's fault.
I'm not saying it's
Solely.
women's fault.
Or
Actually,
like it's like a bias because of, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like,
why are you coming in with the framework that it's either men or women's
I mean,
fault?
that's the
Maybe
framework
it's
you
just
guys are coming up.
no. We're not
actually,
making that.
I'm not attributing
No.
fault.
Yeah.
I'm just saying if we're talking about these negative outcomes impact this group of people,
Right.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, would you agree with me that circumcision is actually a gendered issue?
I would argue that circumcision specifically would be in the case of the U.S. In other instances, female genital mutilation does occur in other third developed countries. It happens in different third developed countries.
Not at
So
similar
it's-
rates.
but
Not at
it's
similar
and
rates.
I didn't say that. I just said it also occurs to women at different rates. I don't think I was making that argument.
Okay,
if I'm
cool. Yeah,
correct.
it
And
happens
it's not
to
the same
bad for
reasons.
women
At the
too.
same
Can you say
time-
that it's bad for men?
I am not incredibly familiar on the practice of genital mutilation for men.
It's
Okay,
But
what do you mean you're
here's
not
the thing.
familiar with the practice?
I know what it is,
You
but
know what it
I'm
is.
not super in-depth researched on it, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I mean, obviously nobody's.
So do you think that, I mean,
So what-
obviously baby boys can't consent to this procedure.
That's not okay for any gender to have to go through.
Okay, but if we're talking
but
about the United
that's a
States,
Okay, I
if
will
we're
say-
talking about the
societal,
United
like-
States,
I agree it's not okay for any gender to go through, but I want to make sure we agree on the definition of gendered issue before I make my statement, right? You would argue that a gendered issue is something that occurs to one gender at a much higher frequency than the other, correct? Circumcision.
I'll grant it, sure.
Yes, circumcision happens to men at a much higher rate, so therefore it is a gendered issue, right?
Well, no, it doesn't happen to men at a much higher rate. It can only happen to men.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
so what, how is? what's
Yes,
the argument?
circumcision specifically, genital mutilation can happen to both genders, right? But we're talking
okay,
about circumcision
sure, I'll
specifically.
grant
yeah.
it, yeah.
Yes, then I would say that specifically is a gendered issue. I agree with you on that. I do.
But that has
Okay.
to do with the like medical issues men experience more, or
No, it's
what does that
mostly
have to do with it?
it's mostly a religious pastime for circumcision,
Right.
which was indeed adopted culturally. But if you're not familiar with the practice, they cut the foreskin of a baby's penis off.
I know.
Essentially, that's what happens.
And in a lot of cases, the downside of that is like less sensation or things like that, like that I've read up on and have. But what is that like? The relevancy.
Well, Brian's argument here is that men overwhelmingly experience this. They can't consent to it. It happens to them when they're children. And it seems that as far as issues go, if truly feminism was about equally attacking these types of issues, which exist, which are left on us by the patriarchy, certainly gender mutilation of men would be one thing, but you never really hear feminists talk about it at all. There's no policy prescriptions whatsoever which is ever advocated by them towards men. They seem to just not give a shit.
Because aren't the fathers also like involved in that decision?
Mothers, well, the thing is this is interesting. As single motherhood has been on the climb, guess what? Circumcision still stays at about the same rate. And so, no, mothers are every bit as responsible for this as fathers.
Yeah,
I
okay,
would-
That's
And also, aren't,
what I wanna
I don't know the specific statistics on this, but I think it's OBGYNs who perform the circumcision, and OBGYNs are predominantly, I think, predominantly women.
I would agree. I think they are. Yeah.
And they're probably advocating if their patient comes to them, well, should I have my male child circumcised? They will probably make a recommendation for circumcision.
Yeah, and I think that too.
But I'm not actually trying
Don't
to
they
point
do
the
that?
finger. I'm not
Yeah.
actually even trying to point the finger
Yeah, I
at men or
misunderstood.
at women. I'm just saying this is a negative outcome that
yeah.
impacts men.
I misunderstood that
No,
part.
Anyways,
I agree
but I
with
don't want
that.
to
I
linger
do.
on the circumcision for too long, but I'm still, again, when it comes to discrimination, I've not really heard a compelling argument. And I'll just show my cards. I actually think men have been more oppressed than women,
Okay.
historically and currently.
Can I say one more thing about that? And
No,
you
I'd
can
actually
toss
like
it?
her to respond to my
No,
statement here.
I want to know like why you think that. Like I'm curious about your perspective.
Yeah, so I could list a whole bunch of things. I could talk about the self-deletion rate, homelessness. Men are much less likely to go to college. I'm trying to think, what are some of the, there's the circumcision thing. That's very big, but I'm actually going to hyper-focus and zero in on just one sole male grievance. And that comes down to, and I actually think that this one, any sort of feminist argument is dead on arrival when it comes to, at least from a comparison perspective. So forced military conscription throughout history and current day, I think is a bigger grievance that's for most of human history, nearly exclusively has been placed on men, is a far bigger grievance, gender grievance, than really, I would argue, all of women's collective grievances combined.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd be open to hearing you actually articulate one female grievance that's greater than forced military conscription. In fact, you can have three. You can combine three, and we'll just add them up.
Just add them up.
Sure.
Okay. And are we talking like present day, but we're talking historical right now too? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.